Hello YouTube, my name is Tyler and this is the second half of my reading wrap-up check-in sort of deal. Last week I posted the midway point. I talked about the 6 books I read in the first half of August. In this video I plan on talking about the rest of the books that I read in the month of August. It is the 31st. I'm definitely not going to finish anything today, so I'm going to talk about the books, and then in a couple days I will post the stats that I usually do in my regular wrap-up. So I read 9 more books since the midpoint check-in, so let's talk about them. I listened to Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America by Kathleen Belew. This was a 4.5-star read that got rounded up to 5. I think if I had physically read it, it might have been a straight 5-star read. I really enjoyed this. However, something about the narrator really just bothered me, and it made it hard to fully love this book, especially because there was a ton of acronyms and initialisms. So you're hearing the KKK a lot, but there was a lot of other organizations that had acronyms and initialisms, and just it was hard to kind of keep that straight in an audio format. But it was just really fascinating and talked about white power and paramilitary movements in a way I hadn't really thought about before. The big main thesis being kind of about how America's inability to fully address the Vietnam War played a big part in the resurgence and the growing of the white power movement in America. It was just really interesting. It wasn't something I had thought about before. I had listened to a podcast called Bundyville, I think, that was about the rise in the militias, and a lot of things I have heard about right-wing terrorism starts at Ruby Ridge. That's kind of where it really, people tend to start that story. However, this starts much earlier in American history, like I said, tying it back to Vietnam, how veterans weren't taken care of, and some of that disaffectedness led into the white power movement. This idea of bringing the war home, which I hadn't really thought about before, and how that played into right-wing propaganda. Just really, really interesting. Lots and lots of good information here. Unfortunately, I just did not love the narrator. I also read An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. This was a 5-star. I really loved this. I expected it to cover a whole lot of different types of indigenous histories in the United States, and that's not what this was. This is very much about, well, colonialism, obviously. I expected that. But how European colonization had obviously built America, but how it is so thoroughly embedded in the American military, and how the US military has become what it is through the Indian Wars, through indigenous removal processes, things of that nature. And it was just really interesting. It was very focused on the wars between the United States government, the military, or the colonial English military powers, and indigenous tribes of all sorts, obviously starting kind of in the East Coast from colonial times into Western tribes as Manifest Destiny occurred. I expected it to go into residential schools and things like that, and it really did not get that in depth to it. And it talks about that in the beginning, how this is like, it is meant to be kind of a starter point, a point for introducing people to this other side of history. So when you're learning American history, you obviously learn it from the winner's perspective. We all know the adage of the winners write history, or whatever the hell it is. So we have this idea of what American history is, and this is telling it from a different perspective. This is what the other side of the coin was. It was just a fascinating, a really interesting read. The first part talked a lot about like the forming of indigenous societies throughout the Americas, which was also really interesting, and just like information I did not know or have previously. I really, really recommend it. 5 stars. It can get a little dry or a little, not necessarily dense, but there's like a lot of dates and names. And so sometimes that could be a little difficult, but overall I thought it was a really like easy to read, digest, understand. I think a lot of people could get a lot out of reading this. I really, really enjoyed it a lot. Yeah. So then I also read Chlorine by Jade Song. I gave this 4 stars. Really, really enjoyed this. So it is a story about a girl named Ren, and she is a swimmer. She's like very dedicated. She's a very good swimmer. She's trying to use this as a way to get into college, but it is a story about obsession. Things go a little off the rails in a good way. It's very unhinged. I did write a review, so let me read that real quick. It's not a very in-depth, but kind of explains why I gave it 4 instead of 5, because there was a lot of stuff that I did enjoy. The writing was a bit rough at points, but overall I had a great time reading and being horrified by this. Will definitely make it a priority to pick up whatever Jade Song puts out next. Yeah, I think this was Jade Song's first book. It definitely felt a little rough in like the actual writing department, but sometimes the like abrasiveness of the writing really suited the story, but sometimes it was just a little clunky. Sometimes the pacing just felt like a little off. I personally didn't like love the end, but it wasn't bad by any means. It didn't piss me off or anything like that. But it just definitely felt a little bit like a first book. But the overall, like, the obsession, the, like, what you will put your body through for sport was really interesting to me as someone who, like, for a while did spend time kind of in competitive sport. Never thought I was going to be, like, an Olympian or anything, but, like, there was something about the way that was talked about and addressed in this book that really resonated with me. And then it just has that like unhinged woman vibe to it, which is really good. It's about mermaids. I don't want to get any further into that, but she's a swimmer, so the mermaid stuff is very interesting, fun, intriguing. I really had a good time with it. I look forward to more work from this author. I also read A Guest in the House by Emily Carroll. I really enjoyed Through the Woods by this author. So one of my best friends pre-ordered this for me for my birthday, but it didn't come out till August. So this came in the mail sometime after I recorded my last video, and I ended up reading this in a day. This is about a woman, a newly married woman, who is having to deal with like the baggage of her husband's ex-wife and family, or like stepdaughter, I guess. Like she's having to like find her footing in this family, where she fits in, and oh, it was just great. I gave it, what did I give it? I gave it 4 stars. Oh, I didn't fully understand the end. I don't totally know what went on in the end, but the art in this was just great. I really enjoy, like, I don't want to spoil anything. There are some very beautiful panels in here. But I also enjoy, she doesn't necessarily do like very traditional like comic stuff. Like all the text here is like, it doesn't feel like a comic even though there are panels up here. I just really enjoy the way she plays with, I feel like there's a word for it and I can't find it quite. The placement of the text on a page or within a panel. I just really enjoy her work. I do. So while it wasn't like a 5-star, it was a little bit of a slow build. There was definitely some spooky scares in here. Like there was an actual jump scare in here, which I don't think I have ever experienced with a horror type graphic novel. Horror tends to not actually work that great for me in graphic novel form, but I really liked her like short story horror collection. I really enjoyed this, even though it wasn't like 5-star, like my next incredible favorite read. It was definitely worth it. I really enjoyed it. So yes, those two were 4 stars. I listened to Troublemaker, Surviving Hollywood and Scientology by Leah Remini. I've been in a weird like Scientology rabbit hole. I started watching Aaron Smith-Levin's videos growing up in Scientology here on YouTube. And he has like a pretty good working relationship with Leah Remini, and she also dropped a lawsuit against Scientology either this month or in like the last month or two. So I've been going down a Scientology rabbit hole. I did listen to Go and Clear, I think it was the beginning of this year, but it might have been last year. I didn't quite love that, but I had watched the documentary previously. And like I had never been like a huge Leah Remini fan or anything. So I had never been intrigued to listen to her memoir, but in the context of I've been consuming a lot of like audio content about Scientology, I decided to give it a go. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I can really appreciate a cursey memoir in the right context. It's narrated by her. It's just really interesting to hear her story, how her family got wrapped up in Scientology, and the way she got herself out of it. She's very blunt and to the point. She can definitely be abrasive at points, but she recognizes that about herself. And at least for me, like it comes off as genuine and like coming from a good place. So yeah, I enjoyed it. If you're interested in Scientology, I would recommend it. Then I read The Forbidden Territory of a Terrifying Woman by Molly Lynch. I think this ended up being a 3.5, got rounded up to 4. This is about a mother in Michigan. She doesn't quite want to be in Michigan. She's from Canada. There is this background of environmental disaster, climate change, like we are living in now, except maybe a little more extreme. And then all these women, specifically mothers, start disappearing, and people don't know what's going on. It's very literary. There is plot, but it's very focused on like Ada and her family, and it was fine. Some parts were like really engrossing, and then some parts I was just like kind of bored. I definitely think it could work for some people, but like it just didn't work for me. I wanted a little more of something, and I'm not quite sure what it was. And then I finished another volume of Yowamushi. Oh, that's the back of it. Another volume of Yowamushi Petal. That was a 5-star. I read Good Neighbors. I did talk about how I was going to buddy read this. It started off kind of strong, and then it just ended up being kind of a dud. It was a 2.5 that got rounded up to 3. It is a suburban neighborhood that kind of start turning, I wouldn't even say on each other, they turn on one specific family. And things get a little chaotic. However, I wanted more. I wanted it to be more than like a he said, she said type of situation. I wanted it to be more complex and more fun than it ended up being. And like the biggest issue I had with this was the writing. I don't know what it was about this author's writing, but the like particular vocabulary, the words she chose to use, always just like would just hit me wrong, and it would distract me from the book. So much of it felt dated to me. It was so strange. It felt like it should be set in the 80s, and if it was, maybe it would have worked just fine for me. You know, it probably still wouldn't have been like a winner, but maybe it would have been less aggravating to read. But the fact that it was supposed to be taking place in 2037, it was supposed to be in the future, and it did not feel futuristic in any way, and it actually felt dated, really made it a struggle for me. Like, it really truly did. Also, the fact that they spoil, like in the very beginning, that people are gonna die at the very beginning of the book, that can be a fun way to start a book, but the fact that this is like, I don't ever feel like the tension ratcheted up really throughout the book. So that big piece of information being thrown out at the very beginning ends up kind of making the rest of the book feel kind of lackluster, even though there is like a reveal near the end. But I don't know, a lot of this just did not work for me, and it's a bummer because I thought it was going to be a win when I first started it, because the beginning is like a family is gonna be murdered and there's a giant sinkhole in the neighborhood. Oh no. And you're like, oh shit, this is gonna be like wild. And then it just ends up being kind of run-of-the-mill. And then the last thing I read was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is a book I have been seeing recommended over and over and over again. And I finally just decided to read it because I needed something short, quick, and easy. And it was very easy to read. It was a very, very quick read. However, this also ended up being a 2.5-star read. It was a lot easier to read it than this. And there were parts, like very high highs. The first 30% I was loving. I was like, oh shit, what's going on here? But once we started getting more information, once like a romance started forming, once we actually started getting answers, I was not having as good of a time, and I absolutely hated the last chapter of this book. I was so mad when I read the last chapter of this book. So that's what ends up getting it as low as it did. So yeah, if you haven't heard about it, it's like some girls at a boarding school in Maine, they end up starting to come down with a strange illness where they're like maybe kind of turning into animals. And there is definitely some like body horror in here. This is YA, so like I don't think this was ever going to be a 5, but I was intrigued to see why everybody kept talking about it. But that's really all I have to say about it. So those were the books, the 9 books I think that I read in the second half of August. Yeah. I will see y'all in a couple days, sometime in the next week, with the stats. All right, bye.